I used to think the desert was empty, a limitless plain of sand and silence stretching into nothingness. Growing up in rural Arizona, you learn to breathe with the heat, to listen to the long, quiet nights, and to accept that sometimes there are sounds that have no source. What I didn't realize was how deeply the desert listens back. That first night, when the tapping on my bedroom window began, I assumed it was just the wind scattering pebbles against the glass. I remember lying there, half asleep, half drifting through some leftover dream, barely aware of the gentle rhythm against the pane. It wasn't until the tapping grew slow and deliberate, almost thoughtful, that I opened my eyes fully. The house was dark, the kind of dark where shapes dissolve. Still, I could feel something waiting just beyond the thin layer of glass separating me from the August night. My heart pressed itself into my throat, and the tapping stopped so suddenly it felt like the world had inhaled with me. Curiosity, or fear disguised as bravery, pulled me out of bed. I lifted the edge of the curtain only an inch, just enough to let a sliver of moonlight slip inside. What I saw wasn't a face or a shape, only the impression of movement. Something had been standing there, close enough for its breath to fog the lower corner of the glass. But the breath wasn't human. It rose in uneven pulses, like a panting animal struggling to imitate a person. The fog lingered too long before fading. A cold wave washed through me, surging from my ribs to my fingers, and I let the curtain fall. I tried to convince myself it had been condensation, a trick of the night air. But condensation doesn't tap, and it doesn't mimic breathing. Still, I crawled back beneath the blanket, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound to return. When it didn't, I found no comfort in the silence. It felt like something was listening to me breathe, measuring me. Sleep wouldn't come, so I turned on my bedside lamp and grabbed my phone. The dim glow painted the walls in soft gold, but even the light felt fragile. Messages from my friends were buried under a dozen desert memes and half-formed jokes from earlier that day. I typed a message about the window but deleted it. No one would believe me. They'd say a coyote wandered too close, or that my imagination had eaten itself alive in the late hours. The night stretched on, slow and heavy, like thick tar. The house shouldn't have creaked, it was too new for that. But each time the wood shifted, I flinched. I kept lifting my eyes toward the window, half expecting the tapping to resume. The moon moved slowly across the sky, its light fading from my room as if it too wanted to leave. By dawn, I was exhausted but relieved. Morning meant safety, or at least it was supposed to. At breakfast, my mom asked why I looked like I hadn't slept. I shrugged vague answers her way, unwilling to share what felt too strange to explain. She would laugh, and my dad would chalk it up to the stress of school starting soon. But there was something in my mother's eyes, something tight and nervous when I said I heard sounds outside. She put her hand on mine gently, the kind of touch meant to soothe a small child. "Animals wander this time of year," she said. "They get confused by the heat." But I caught the flicker of worry she tried to hide. She glanced at the window, as if expecting something behind the glass in broad daylight. I wanted to press her, to ask if she had heard anything too, but the words clung to my throat. Instead, we ate quietly, as though too much noise might draw something closer. Later that afternoon, when the desert sun bled into shades of orange and violet, I walked outside to check the ground beneath my window. The dirt was undisturbed, except for a series of prints that made no sense. They were shaped vaguely like footprints, but too narrow, with elongated impressions that tapered unnaturally. They seemed to drag, as if whatever made them walk but didn't fully understand how. A shiver passed through me despite the heat. I crouched and tried to trace one with my fingertip, feeling the depth of it. Too deep to be human, too precise to be an animal. My breath caught when I noticed smaller impressions overlaying the first set, almost like hands pressed into the dirt. Long fingers splayed. The realization hit me with a nauseating certainty. Whatever had tapped on my window had stood there for a long time, close enough to study me through the glass, close enough to learn the rhythm of the house. And I knew with a dread blooming deep in my gut that it wasn't done with me, not by a long shot. I spent the rest of the day trying to forget the prints, burying myself in chores and pretending the heat alone made my skin prickle. But as evening crept in, the memory kept clawing its way back, those narrow impressions, Those two long fingers. By the time the sky melted into deep purples and the first stars blinked awake, dread curled in my stomach like a living thing. I kept glancing toward my bedroom window, as if expecting a face to appear there before sunset even finished. My mom noticed my distracted pacing, but she stayed oddly quiet. Eventually, she suggested we watch a movie as a family, something light to break the tension none of us admitted was hanging in the air. My dad made popcorn, my younger brother sprawled across the couch, and we tried to create an atmosphere of normalcy. But every time I laughed, the sound felt forced, hollow. My ears stayed tuned to the silence outside, waiting for a tap, a scrape, a slow exhale against glass. By the time the movie ended, my nerves were wound so tight that my own footsteps sounded like they belonged to someone else. I went to my room reluctantly, pausing at the doorway as if crossing into it felt like stepping back into danger. The window was still, the curtains unmoving, despite the thin desert breeze pressing against the house. I kept the lamp on, telling myself it was temporary, a one-night exception. But even in the warm glow of the room, shadows clung to the corners too heavily. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling aimlessly through my phone just for the noise it made. Minutes passed, then an hour. Every small creak of the house tightened a knot in my chest. Around midnight, exhaustion finally pulled me towards sleep, and I let myself lie down, phone still in hand. The light from the screen dimmed, flickered, then shut off completely. I didn't remember closing my eyes. I only remember how suddenly the silence shifted like something outside had exhaled in relief, realizing I had almost drifted away. My eyes snapped open, and before my mind could fully catch up to the moment, I heard it. It came from the other side of the window, a soft, stuttering whisper, not tapping, not scratching, a voice that didn't belong to the night. Yvonne. The way it stretched my name made my blood run cold. It wasn't my mother's voice, but it tried to be. Every syllable bent wrong, like someone pulling a shape out of wet clay and forcing it into something familiar. I didn't move. Couldn't. The whisper came again, steadier this time. Let me in. My throat tightened until breathing felt impossible. The window remained closed, the curtain drawn, but the words seeped through as though they didn't need the physical passage. A slow tapping started below the whisper, gentle at first, then rhythmic. I curled my fingers into the blanket, pressing myself deeper into the mattress, praying it would stop. But the voice kept repeating my name, each attempt closer to correct, closer to sounding like someone I trusted. Finally, after what felt like hours, the whisper shifted lower, broken, like a voice learning the limits of a throat not meant for speech, and it tried again. This time, it used my brother's voice. Perfectly. Evan, open the window. Hearing his familiar tone dripping with something unnatural made my vision blur with terror. I wanted to scream for him, but I knew somehow that doing so would invite whatever waited outside to try the door instead. It felt smart, patient, as if it understood fear intimately and knew exactly how to peel me open. The tapping slowed, becoming softer, almost coaxing, then silence. A long, dreadful silence that made my heart pound loud enough for me to feel it in my teeth. I stared at the window, expecting movement, expecting a shadow to ripple across the curtains. But there was nothing. The quiet felt like a held breath against its breath. Just when I thought it might be gone, something brushed lightly along the glass. A drag, a test. And then the voice returned in a whisper so clear it felt like someone was speaking directly into my ear from inside the room. I know you're awake. The shock jolted me into action. I leapt from the bed and bolted into the hallway, slamming my door behind me as though that flimsy piece of wood could stop anything. My parents woke instantly to my frantic shouting. My mom rushed over, grabbing my shoulders, asking what happened. I couldn't form coherent sentences. The words tumbled out in jagged fragments. Window, voice, brother, whisper. My dad grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, despite my mom begging him not to. We stood huddled by the front door, listening as the desert swallowed every sound. Minutes passed, each one stretching unbearably. When my dad returned, his face was tight, pale. He said he saw nothing out there, but I noticed the way his hands shook slightly, the way he avoided looking toward my window. My mom insisted I sleep in their room for the night, and I didn't argue. I lay awake meanwhile. Sleep didn't come easily after that night, not in my parents' room, not even with their steady breathing beside me. I drifted in and out, every small noise snapping me violently back to awareness. By morning, my body felt like it had been wrung out and hung to dry. My parents tiptoed around each other as if words might shatter the uneasy peace we'd forced over the house. My brother asked why I'd slept in their room, and I made up something about a nightmare. But he only narrowed his eyes suspiciously. He was used to my nightmares. None of them had ever driven me out of bed before. When I stepped outside later, sunlight spilled across the desert in a way that should have felt comforting, but my skin prickled as if the daylight itself had grown thin. I checked beneath my window again, half hoping the prints had vanished, half terrified they had multiplied. What I found made my stomach flip. The prints were deeper and now fresh, and next to them were long parallel grooves in the dirt, dragged from the wall outward like fingernails scraping across the ground. Whatever had stood there during the night had not walked away, it had crawled. I knelt beside the grooves, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. The tracks looked frantic, almost desperate. But what unsettled me most was their direction. They didn't lead into the desert. They arced around the side of the house toward the back door. I followed slowly, each step feeling like I was walking deeper into a lie the world had been telling me. That monsters don't exist, that windows keep us safe, that voices don't come from nowhere. As I rounded the corner, I saw the back door screen bent ever so slightly inward. The metal frame had fine scratches along the edge, long and thin like something had hooked its fingers through it and pulled. The lock held, but the thought of it being tested made my breath stutter. My dad came out a moment later, asking what I was doing. I stepped aside so he could see. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He only reached forward and straightened the screen with a trembling hand. When I asked if he believed me now, he didn't answer. Instead, he told me to get inside, his voice barely above a whisper. We called the sheriff again that afternoon. He arrived with the same weary expression he'd worn before, as if we were asking him to solve the idea of fear itself. But when my dad pointed out the tracks and scratches, something flickered in the sheriff's eyes, recognition wrapped in dread. He crouched beside the impressions, tracing the length of the grooves with the back of his knuckle. He didn't touch them directly, as if convinced that doing so would link him to whatever had made them. When my mom asked what kind of animal could do something like that, he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood, scanning the desert as though expecting to see something watching us. Finally, he said the tracks could belong to a coyote suffering from mange, but his voice lacked conviction. My dad challenged the explanation quietly, asking what kind of coyote mimicked human voices. The sheriff's expression darkened. He told us to keep our doors locked at night and stay together. When he left, he didn't drive away immediately. He just sat in his car for several minutes, staring in the direction of the mountains before finally pulling onto the road. As evening approached, tension thickened in the house like a storm building pressure. My mom closed all the blinds early. My dad double-checked every lock, every latch, every window. Usually, he teased my mom for being overly cautious, but this time his efforts felt like ritual and offering to whatever lurked outside. My brother tried to lighten the mood by suggesting we play a game or watch another movie, but none of us had the energy to pretend. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, darkness swept across the desert in one long breath. I felt it settle over the house. The stillness that followed wasn't peaceful, it was expectant. Somewhere outside, something was waiting. We gathered in the living room, all of us pretending the cluster of lamps we'd left on would guard us. Hours passed without incident, and the false sense of security began to slip into my bones. Maybe tonight will be quiet. Maybe last night was the peak of it. Maybe the sheriff's presence had scared it off. I let my guard down far too soon. Just after midnight, the scratching began. Soft at first, so faint I thought it was my imagination. A slow, deliberate stroke along the siding near the back door. Then another, and another. It continued with a measured pace, like something tracing the outline of the house with careful intention. My parents froze. My brother's eyes went wide. No one spoke. No one breathed too loudly. The scratching moved toward the kitchen window, dragging lightly across the frame. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. I stood up slowly, compelled by a terrible curiosity, and stepped. My father grabbed my shoulder and pulled me back from the kitchen before I could react. The voice outside his voice echoed through the room again, with a steadiness that didn't belong to anything human. "Evan, open the door." Hearing it mimic him so perfectly made my stomach twist. It wasn't guessing anymore. It was learned. My dad stepped forward, placing himself between the door and the rest of us, his arm outstretched protectively. My mom whispered we should call the sheriff, but my dad shook his head sharply. He motioned for us to stay behind him, eyes fixed on the dark window as if staring it down would keep it from pushing any farther. The scratching resumed soft, almost thoughtful, as though whatever waited outside was considering its next approach. Then the shadow passed across the kitchen window, faint but undeniable, a slow glide like something leaning close enough to peer inside. We held our breaths, collectively suspended in fear. When the shape moved away from the glass, it didn't walk. It slid, like skin being pulled across bone in one single unnatural motion. My dad motioned us toward the living room, and we gathered there again under the dim light. My brother hugged his knees, pretending not to be shaking. My mother sat beside him, whispering soft reassurances that sounded more like prayers than comfort. The scratching traveled along the side of the house, turning corners, seeking entry points with patience that made my skin crawl. I could hear it pause under each window, as if checking whether we'd grown careless. Then came the quiet thud of something brushing against the living room wall right behind where we sat. My mom gasped. My dad held a finger to his lips, but the tremor in his hand betrayed his fear. The thud came again, firmer this time, and then a low, guttural sound vibrated through the wood. Not a growl, not speech, something in between, like a voice trying to remember how to be a voice. I felt it in my chest that made my bones ache. Minutes stretched into hours, the desert night growing colder, tighter, as though it drew its breath around us. The scratching stopped completely around 2 a.m, leaving behind a silence too heavy to trust. My dad stayed awake at the edge of the living room, watching the hallway that led to the doors and windows. My mom eventually dozed off, though her sleep was shallow and broken. I tried closing my eyes, but every time I nearly drifted, the memory of that voice, my father's voice, dragged me back. I couldn't shake the image of the shadow at the kitchen window. Its height matched a person's, but its movement, nothing naturally moved like that. At one point, I thought I heard a faint tapping from somewhere near my bedroom, but it ended so quickly I wasn't sure if it was real or just an echo stuck inside my mind. I wanted to believe it had left us alone, that staying quiet had convinced it to wander elsewhere. But the silence felt like a lie, a trick, a waiting. Just before dawn, the house let out a long, groaning creak, wood expanding with the temperature shift. My dad stood instantly, convinced it was something outside moving again, but no scratching followed, no tapping. The horizon brightened with the thinnest ribbon of pink. Sunlight trickled in so slowly, it felt reluctant to return. When morning finally broke, we opened the blinds one by one, waiting to see what the night had left behind. The area outside the kitchen window was covered in marks, not claw marks, not exactly, but stretched finger-like impressions dragged along the frame. Some were prints resembling hands but distorted, each finger too long, too narrow, as if the creature had shaped itself to mimic human anatomy but hadn't fully understood it. Beside the back door were deeper grooves, carved into the wood itself. My dad ran his fingers over them silently. My brother whispered that maybe it was gone. My mom, voice trembling, said she didn't think things like this simply go. We gathered in the kitchen, exhausted and unsure of what to do next. Leaving suddenly felt dangerous, like stepping into the open would give it exactly what it wanted. My dad suggested we stay in the house through the day and keep all the blinds shut. My mom wanted to call the sheriff again, but even she sounded unconvinced he could help. While they whispered in tense fragments, I wandered toward the hallway leading to my room. Something had been gnawing at me since the scratching started. Something I hadn't fully acknowledged. When I reached my door, I saw it immediately. Along the edges of the window frame, thin lines of dried mud streaked the glass, mud shaped into long smears, like fingers dragging upward from the outside. The realization hit me like a strike to the chest. Last night, it hadn't just been scratching the walls. It had been at my window again. It had been trying quietly, carefully to lift it open. And this time, the lock had been the only thing stopping it. As I stepped back, heart pounding. The rest of the morning passed in a kind of muffled haze, each of us moving through the house as if afraid to disturb the walls. My dad kept checking the doors, testing locks he had already tested a dozen times. My mom hovered in the kitchen, pretending to clean but mostly staring out the small gap where the curtain didn't meet the frame. My brother stayed unusually close to me, asking questions he didn't really want the answers to what I had heard, what it sounded like, whether I thought it would come back. I lied to him gently, insisting it wouldn't, even though every word felt heavy with false hope. Around noon, the sheriff returned without being called. He knocked gently, almost apologetically, and stepped inside with the weary caution of someone visiting a sick relative. He asked to see the new marks, and when we showed him, he paled. He didn't touch anything this time. He didn't even crouch. Instead, he took a step back, removed his hat, and rubbed the bridge of his nose like a man fighting off a truth he didn't want to say. My dad pressed him, demanding to know what he thought it was. The sheriff hesitated too long. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. He said there were stories, old ones, far older than the town, about things that took shapes, things that mimicked voices with chilling precision, things that studied humans to learn how to pass among them. He emphasized he didn't believe most of it, but some of the elders on the reservation swore by it. Creatures that lived between worlds, wearing skins that weren't theirs. My mom clenched her hands until her knuckles whitened, whispering the word none of us wanted spoken aloud. Skinwalker. The sheriff didn't confirm it, but the look in his eyes was enough. He advised staying inside after sunset, avoiding windows, avoiding responding to any voices outside, no matter how familiar they sounded. Before leaving, he paused at the door and looked at me specifically. "If it calls your name," he said, "don't answer, not even by accident." His warning settled over me like a frost. After he drove off, the house felt smaller, its walls now barriers between us and something beyond comprehension. My brother asked in a tiny voice if names could be stolen. I didn't have the heart to answer. That afternoon, heat pressed heavily against the house. The air conditioner hummed unevenly, struggling to keep up, but the real discomfort came from the weight of anticipation. Each of us found excuses to stay close together, drifting from room to room in an instinctive pack-like formation. I retreated to the hallway at one point, trying to gather my thoughts, and that's when I heard a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. Not outside, inside, like the echo of my name carried on a draft that didn't exist. "Evan?" I spun around, heart hammering, but no one was near me. The house was still, too still. I backed away slowly, returning to the living room under the flimsy safety of lamplight. I didn't mention what I heard, not yet. By late afternoon, exhaustion began tugging at me again, but I refused to close my eyes. The memory of the voice mimicking my father was too loud in my mind. When dusk finally draped itself across the desert, the tension in the house sharpened. We dimmed the lights, closed every curtain, and gathered once again in the living room. It had become a nightly rite ritual, waiting for something we could neither fight nor flee from. As night settled in fully, the temperature dropped sharply, the way it always does in the desert. But this cold felt unnatural, creeping under the doors and through the walls like icy fingers. Hours passed. No scratching, no tapping, no voice. The silence itself became unsettling. My dad paced, restless, as if waiting for something inevitable. My mom whispered that maybe the sheriff's visit scared it off, though even she sounded unconvinced. Around midnight, my brother finally fell asleep, curled up beside her. I remained awake, watching the front door, my eyes adjusting to the dim room. Then, barely audible, I heard a soft rustle from the backyard. I straightened, holding my breath. Another rustle, a shift of weight. Something was moving. My dad froze, sensing it too. We waited. The sound drew closer, slow and deliberate. And then, directly behind the living room wall, Something dragged across the siding, long, slow, steady. My mom clutched my brother tighter. My dad stepped toward the window, but didn't dare open the blinds. The dragging stopped. Silence swallowed the house. Then, with a clarity that ripped the breath from my lungs, it spoke. Evan. But this time, it wasn't my father's voice, or my mother's, or my brother's. It was mine, perfectly. Every inflection, every tone, as if I were standing outside speaking to myself. I felt the blood drain from my face, my fingers going numb. My mom covered her mouth, muffling a cry. My dad whispered for me to stay absolutely silent. The thing outside repeated my name again, gently, coaxing, like a... None of us slept after hearing my voice outside the wall. The hours between midnight and dawn stretched into a shapeless blur of fear, each minute dragging its weight across my nerves like sandpaper. My dad stood guard at the living room archway, his silhouette stiff and watchful in the dim light. My mom clutched my brother, who shook even in sleep, trembling as though his dreams somehow echoed the terror just beyond the walls. I stayed beside my dad, unable to sit, unable to breathe normally, feeling as if something had crawled under my skin and anchored itself there. Each time I blinked, I saw the image of myself, but not me standing outside the house, whispering my name with a mouth that didn't belong to a human. I wondered what it looked like right now. Was it truly mimicking my face, or only the voice? Or had it only learned the idea of my face, just enough to blur the differences? The soft hum of the refrigerator became deafening in the thick silence. When dawn finally broke, pale and thin, my entire body ached with the strain of hours spent frozen in fear. The moment sunlight touched the floorboards, my dad moved briskly, checking every lock, every window, every inch of the walls that the creature had pressed itself against. The siding behind the living room was streaked with dust and oil, as though something massive and warm had been leaning there. Long smears pressed into the dirt beneath the wall showed impressions of hands or paws or something in between. Each print looked more human than the night before, wider, more upright, more deliberate. My mom stiffened as she saw them, whispering that it was learning faster than we could react. My dad didn't argue. He simply said we needed real help. Not the sheriff, someone who understood whatever this thing was, someone who wasn't bound to laws but to survival. He mentioned an elder who lived outside town, someone the sheriff had referenced but refused to involve. My mom hesitated, torn between terror of leaving the house and terror of staying in it. Finally, she nodded. My brother asked if we were running away. My dad said softly, "No, we're finding someone who knows how to make it stop." His voice trembled just slightly on that last word. We packed quickly, stuffing only essentials into bags. Water, food, blankets, flashlights. The entire time, my nerves buzzed like exposed wires, expecting the thing to appear in broad daylight and stalk toward us with my face stretched across its skull. Every sound outside made me jump. Even the wind felt wrong. My dad loaded everything into the car, glancing at the horizon every few seconds. My mom kept telling us to stay close, repeating it like a mantra meant to anchor her unraveling calm. When we finally stepped outside, the desert felt too open, too vulnerable, as if the sky itself watched us. The ground around the house showed more prints of fresh ones that circled the property like a predator pacing its cage. Some of the prints trailed off toward the road, but none truly left. They looped back again and again, learning the edges of our world. The sheriff's warnings echoed in my mind as we climbed into the car. Don't answer it. Don't acknowledge it. Don't let it hear your voice. I stayed silent, even as my thoughts pounded inside my head. My dad started the engine. The moment the tires crunched over the dirt, I felt something shift behind the house. As we began driving away, I couldn't help glancing into the side mirror. At first, I saw nothing but dust rising behind us. Then as the car gained speed, I saw something long and lean moving, slipping out from the shadow of the house. My breath snagged in my throat. It didn't run, it didn't crawl, it unfolded. Its limbs stretched into shapes almost human, almost familiar, almost mine. I watched in horrified fascination as it straightened, its posture wobbling like someone learning how to balance for the first time. Then it turned its head toward us. Even from this distance, even through the haze of dust, I saw the grotesque echo of my features pulling across its face, eyes set too far apart, jaw slightly unhinged, skin too smooth in some places and too tight in others. My voice echoed faintly on the wind, though its mouth barely moved. My mom screamed for my dad to drive faster. He pressed the gas pedal down hard, the engine roaring as we sped away from the house. But the thing didn't chase us. It only watched, head tilted, body swaying like it was listening to something we couldn't hear. The road ahead was empty, stretching toward the distant cluster of trees where the elder lived. My dad didn't slow down, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. My mom held my brother close, whispering prayers he barely heard. I kept staring at the mirror, long after the creature had vanished from sight. Even when the dust settled, even when the house was no more than a speck behind us, the sense of being watched lingered. As if the thing didn't need to pabulasho. The elder's home sat at the end of a winding dirt path, half hidden beneath crooked juniper trees that swayed as though whispering secrets to the wind. It wasn't a house, but a weather-worn lodge patched with hides and cedar planks, smoke threading from a thin chimney in a straight, unwavering line. My dad parked the car several yards away, as if afraid the mere presence of metal might offend whatever forces the elder worked with. The moment we stepped out, the air shifted heavier, denser, carrying a faint, unfamiliar scent of charred sage and sweetgrass. My mom clutched my brother's wrist, whispering for him not to speak. I kept my mouth shut, aware that silence felt less like a choice now and more like a shield I could physically hold around myself. The elder was already waiting outside, leaning on a carved walking stick whose surface was etched with symbols older than any language we knew. His gaze passed over each of us before settling on me. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes tightened. "It chose you," he murmured, voice low and gravelly. "Come inside, quickly, before it realizes where you've gone." The inside of the lodge smelled of smoke, herbs, and earth. Strings of bones and feathers hung from the ceiling, swaying gently though there was no breeze. A fire crackled in a deep pit at the center, its flames strangely quiet, as if it had been instructed not to speak too loudly. The elder guided us into a circle marked by charcoal lines on the floor, each symbol drawn with deliberate precision. He told us not to step outside the markings unless he said so. My dad started to ask a question, but the elder raised one hand sharply. "Its ears are not in its head," he said. "It hears through you, through the fear you feed it." My throat tightened. I suddenly felt every tremor in my pulse, every icy drop of dread sliding through my body. The elder turned to me again. "Tell me," he said softly, "when did it first speak with your voice?" I hesitated, paralyzed by the rule not to answer, but he nodded once, permitting me. So I told him about the voice outside the house, about the reflection that wasn't mine, about the thing unfolding from the shadows as if putting on a human suit. The elder listened without blinking, face like stone. When I finished, he knelt beside the fire and began pulling handfuls of herbs from a woven basket: sage, juniper, something that looked like dried black moss. He scattered them into the flames, which flared bright blue, casting warped shadows along the walls. "It is not a skinwalker," he said at last. "Not yet." The word "yet" dropped into the air like a stone. A true skinwalker was once human. What follows you is something older, something that studies people until it learns to wear them. My mom covered her mouth, stifling a gasp. The elder pointed the tip of his staff at me. "It marked you when you looked at it, when you recognize a piece of yourself in it. That recognition is how it grows." My stomach twisted. The elder continued, "It will try to become you fully, but it cannot finish unless you give it the last piece." I didn't understand. He tapped his chest. "Your name, not what people call you. The real one is your breath name, the sound your spirit makes when you cry out in fear." My pulse hammered in my ears. I hadn't given the creature anything. I hadn't spoken to them. But the elder shook his head. "No, you did. In your mind." Suddenly, the ground trembled faintly, like something massive stepping onto the path outside. My dad moved toward the door, but the elder barked for him to stay inside the circle. The trembling grew, the walls creaking as though something pressed against them. I could hear it now, my voice, but deeper, distorted, as though filtered through lungs not built for sound. It called my name again and again, dragging each syllable like a predator dragging prey. My mom clutched my arm, tears streaming silently. The elder lifted his staff and pressed the base of it firmly against the floor. The charcoal symbols around us flared with pale fire, forming a boundary that made the air vibrate. "It is here," the elder said, "but it is blind unless you call back." I shook my head violently. I wouldn't. I couldn't. But the creature outside scraped its two long limbs across the wooden walls, mimicking the rhythm of my heartbeat. The elder leaned close and whispered, "You must give it something false, something that is not you, a name that leads it away from your real one." My breath hitched. "But what name?" He stared at me. "One that ends what it started." The door creaked as the creature pressed against it, boards bowing inward, its silhouette stretching wrong in the flickering light. My voice leaked through the cracks, calling with increasing desperation. My mind raced, grasping for something untrue yet binding. And then it hit me with my grandmother's story about decoy names, the ones given to keep spirits confused. I inhaled sharply and whispered a name that wasn't mine, a name never carried by my blood, never tied to my life. The moment it left my lips, the creature outside shrieked, my voice shredding into something feral and furious. The walls shook violently, dust falling from the rafters. The elder slammed the base of his staff into the floor, chanting words that vibrated through my bones. A bright ring of light burst outward from the charcoal circle, snapping through the lodge like a shockwave. The shrieking stopped. The trembling stopped. Silence swallowed everything. When the elder finally opened the door, nothing stood outside but a long smear of black dust fading into the desert wind. "It cannot wear what does not exist," he said quietly. My dad exhaled a trembling breath. My mom collapsed into relieved sobs. I stepped outside, the air cool against my face, and for the first time in days I heard nothing echoing my name except my own steady heartbeat.